What if you were trapped in a frozen wilderness with no electricity, no heater, no modern shelter, and a storm cold enough to kill you before sunrise? Picture it, a black sky with no stars, wind screaming across open ground, ice cutting into your face until your skin stops reporting the pain. Every breath leaves your mouth as a white cloud and disappears. Your fingers stop feeling the rope in your hands. Your boots freeze solid around your feet. And the storm is not weakening. It is getting stronger with every hour. Now understand something that makes this far worse. In the far north of Scandinavia, above the Arctic Circle, the sun does not rise for weeks at a time. This is not one terrible night you can survive until morning, because morning is not coming. There is no dawn for almost a month. For the Vikings, more than 1,000 years ago, this was not a disaster. This was December, every winter, for their entire lives. And they did not just endure it, they built an entire civilization inside it. Their greatest weapon was never the axe or the longship. It was hidden in the walls of their homes, in the clothes on their backs, and in the food in their bowls. In the year 1104, a volcano in Iceland erupted and buried one of those homes under ash. 8 centuries later, people dug it back out, and that house was still holding its secret. And when the firewood ran out, the Vikings turned to another source of heat. It was already inside the house with them. It had 4 legs. From the outside, a Viking longhouse looked like almost nothing. A long shape of timber and grass, half swallowed by the landscape, with smoke drifting out of the roof into the freezing air. But that plain shape was a lie. Inside those walls was a machine, and every part of it had one job: to hold on to heat. It started before a single beam was raised, because the first decision was where to build. The Vikings chose sheltered ground, the base of a hill, the fold of a valley, a protected stretch of coastline, places where the land itself would break the storm before it ever reached the walls. They let nature take the first hit. Then came the walls themselves. Timber, packed earth and clay, layered together, and in Iceland those earthen walls could be nearly 6 feet thick. Thicker than the wall of a fortress, built not to stop an army, but to stop the cold. Overhead, the roof was covered in turf and living grass, a blanket that grew, and some homes were sunk partway into the ground so the earth could do the rest of the work. Even the doorway was designed. It was low, and it was narrow, so that cold air could barely find its way in, which meant every single person who entered that house had to bow their head to do it. Respect built directly into the architecture, and these were not small buildings. At Borg, in northern Norway, archaeologists uncovered a longhouse 270 feet long, longer than a football field, with generations of one family living under a single roof. Because the Vikings understood the principle that modern engineers still follow. Survival is not about making heat. Survival is about refusing to let heat leave. But the cold was not what they feared most. There was another killer in the north, quieter, and it did not come from outside. And the next source of warmth in that house was not made of wood, or earth, or stone. It breathed. Cattle, sheep, goats, sometimes horses. Not in a barn across the yard, but inside, under the same roof, behind a low partition just steps from where the family slept. And this was not poverty. This was engineering. A single grown cow gives off roughly as much heat as a household space heater running all day and all night. And it never needs to be switched on, never runs out of fuel, and never goes cold at 3 in the morning. Put a few of them in one end of a longhouse, and you have not just changed the temperature of a room, you have changed whether people live until spring. So the Vikings arranged the space around that fact. The family lived on the higher ground, the animals on the lower, because warm air rises and cold air sinks, and every inch of that slope was working for them. But there is something in this that the numbers cannot hold. Through the darkest months, those animals were not livestock. They were housemates. Their breathing was the sound people fell asleep to. Their smell was the smell of home. And when a cow died in midwinter, a family did not only lose milk, they lost a piece of the warmth of the house itself. The fire worked the same way, quietly and carefully. Not a roaring blaze, because a big fire is a fast way to go bankrupt. A low, steady flame instead, fed just enough, burning through the night. The smoke was the price, and even the smoke was put to work, drying the timber, keeping the insects out, curing the fish and meat hung from the beams above. And when the wood ran short, they burned peat, dried dung, seaweed, whatever the land offered. In Iceland, there was almost no forest at all. They crossed entire winters without firewood. Then, before sleep, they pulled stones from the edge of the hearth, wrapped them in hide, and carried them to bed. The first hot water bottle in human history, 1,000 years early. And still, when that fire sank low around midnight, none of it was enough, because night was the most dangerous part of the day. Cold air is heavy, and it settles, cooling along the floor while the family sleeps, pulling the warmth out of a body, hour after hour, without ever waking it. Lie down on frozen ground in that house, and there was a real chance you would not get up again. So the Vikings did the simplest, brilliant thing. They slept above the cold. Wooden platforms raised along the walls, lifted clear of the floor and into the warmer air near the roof, packed with straw and hides and wool underneath the body, where the heat leaks out fastest. Some of those platforms were closed off with curtains of hide, small enclosed spaces that trapped a person's own breath and body heat. A house inside the house. But here is the thing the cold never gets credit for, because the cold was not the real killer. Water was. Wet clothing pulls heat out of a body many times faster than cold air ever could, which means a man who fell through ice, or simply worked too hard and sweated through his tunic, could die in clothing that looked perfectly warm. And the Viking answer to that was wool. Wool keeps holding warmth, even when it is soaked, something linen cannot do and cotton absolutely cannot do. That single property made wool the most strategic material in the entire civilization. Think about what that means. A sail for a longship swallowed a staggering quantity of wool, years of spinning and weaving by the women of a household. The people who carried the Vikings across the ocean were not holding axes. They were holding spindles. Food followed the same logic, because fat carries more than twice the energy of grain, pound for pound, so butter, fish, meat, and animal fat were not indulgence, they were fuel. Dried fish, salted meat, fermented food, stored grain. And in the darkest week of the year they spent some of it on Yule, feasting and drinking and telling stories, because a spirit freezes too. The Vikings in Greenland knew all of this. They built the houses, they kept the cattle, they wore the wool, and then they vanished. Before we answer that, there is one more source of heat left, and it was always the strongest one. It was the people. Inside a longhouse, every person had a job, and every job was a piece of staying alive. Someone kept the fire from dying. Someone cooked. Someone mended the wool and the tools and the roof. Children, parents, grandparents, all in one room, sleeping close together under heavy furs, with the dogs pressed in beside them, guarding and warming at the same time. And through the longest darkness of the year, the old people talked. Not to pass the time, when there is no written manual. The story is the manual. Where to build, how thick to cut the turf, what to do when the wood runs out. Every survival lesson the Vikings ever learned travelled by voice, from an old mouth to a young ear, beside a fire. The story was the technology, and that is what the ash preserved. In the year 1104, the volcano Hekla erupted and buried a farm at Stung in Iceland, and when it was excavated nearly 9 centuries later, there was no treasure in it and no weapons. Just a hearth, sleeping platforms, and a space for the animals. What they left behind was not gold, it was the blueprint for staying alive. Which brings us back to Greenland. Those settlers had every piece of this knowledge, and the knowledge did not save them. The climate turned, the ice came south, the old ways stopped working, and they held on to them anyway, until the settlements fell silent. So the lesson is not that the ancients were wise. The lesson is harder than that. Knowledge only protects you for as long as you are still willing to change it. Human beings have never survived by conquering nature. We survived by understanding it. And after all of it, the walls, the fire, the wool, the animals, the truth is simple. The warmest house was never the one with the biggest fire. It was the one with the most people in it. Here at Dark Origins, we dig up the stories of how humanity refused to disappear. Because every ancient discovery hides a harder question. How far would you go to survive? And what has the ice not given back yet?